Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing, as we go along, the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, let us dive in and continue our exploration of the Secret Doctrine with Is Gravitation a Law? The corpuscular theory has been unceremoniously put aside, but gravitation, the principle that all bodies attract each other with a force proportional directly to their masses and inversely to the squares of the distances between them, survives to this day and reigns, supreme as ever, in the alleged ethereal waves of space. As a hypothesis, it has been threatened with death for its inadequacy to embrace all the facts presented to it. As a physical law, it is the king of the late and once all-potent imponderables. It is little short of blasphemy, an insult to Newton's grand memory to doubt it, is the exclamation of an American reviewer of Isis Unveiled. We do not, even now, fully understand gravity. Now, there are many speculations. I have mine, other people have theirs. I believe that it is more of a magnetic attractive force, not necessarily related to mass. That could very well be wrong, but there are reasons to believe that, right? We're not going to dive into all that, but they did not have even the understanding that we have today back in the 1880s. And so a lot of this is going to be somewhat controversial simply because there was not the understanding that we have today. But it is not an insult to anyone ever to question their speculations. That includes Newton, that includes Einstein, that includes anybody who is making any public statements whatsoever, myself included. You should question everyone. If you are in a position where you are capable, you should test their hypotheses to ensure that they are correct, right? When they give you the results of their testing of the hypotheses, you should put it to the test as well. That is true for every single person, every single time, every single place, and every single instance. There are times to take people on faith, but that is merely until you can prove it, right? Anything that I say, speculation, or even what I claim to be fact, take it with a grain of salt. Go and investigate for yourself. Anyone telling you not to question science is doing science wrong. Completely and totally all the way wrong. Science is literally trying to prove your own hypotheses wrong, and then when you can't, giving it to someone else so that they can try to prove it wrong to see if they can. That is how science works. The results that we record from people not being able to prove it wrong is where we get our theorems. And so we have a theorem of gravitation related to mass, right, that was explained. That doesn't make it true, right? That is one of those things that we are still today working out because there are complicated mathematics out in space that do not work according to the laws that we understand now. And if it doesn't work according to the law, then there's probably something wrong with your law. The way that light interacts over a distance, we can see things that should not be possible if gravitation as currently understood is true. Now, I believe that it is much more related to an attractive force, right? So there is something within you holding you together in the particular configuration that you're in. I believe that there is also a force holding everything together in the particular configuration that it's in, and that force is magnetism. Magnetism plays a part in pretty much everything. Every single atom is held in its orbit, right? You have the nucleus when it's surrounded by an electron flowing around it. That is held in place by magnetics. Every interaction, every change, every anything Like when an ionic bond is formed, it is because of magnetic attraction. Everything plays back into magnetics. And while I don't have a full understanding of that, it does indeed make much more sense than, well, it's just randomly drawn because this thing is big. Especially since, once again, the deep space observations that we are making proves that our understanding of gravitation is not full. It may be close to correct, but it is not there. And so, there is nobody who is above being questioned. I don't care who it is. I don't care what it is. I don't care if they're telling you the water is wet, which is a debate somehow, but water makes things wet. It's not actually wet itself. You're just trying too hard. Anyway, back to the text. Well, what is finally that invisible and intangible God in whom we should have believed on blind faith? Astronomers who see in gravitation an easygoing solution for many things and an universal force which allows them to calculate thereby planetary motions care little about the cause of attraction. They call gravity a law, a cause in itself. We call the forces acting under that name effects, and very secondary effects too. One day, it will be found that these scientific hypotheses do not answer after all, and then it will follow the corpuscular theory of light and be consigned to rest for many scientific eons in the archives of all exploded speculations. That is a speculation itself. I am not familiar with the corpuscular theory, but a corpuscle is a small unit, right? It is like a cell. And so I'm assuming that this is in line with my theory, right? The theory that I hold is that the spirit, the ether, and plasma are all the same thing, and that it is composed from every single atom in existence, even the ones that are differentiated into our corporeal beings, right? Every atom within me is part of plasma. Every atom that surrounds me is part of plasma. Some of it is held in potential and some of it is kinetic, but it is all the same, right? It is all one mesh, and that's probably pretty close to the corpuscular theory. Now, I don't know the corpuscular theory, so I am just speculating based off of the word, but I don't know that it will explode the speculations otherwise. Right? Now, I believe that this is close, if what I am saying is true, to what I believe. Like, light is a particle that moves in the form of a wave. We have several experiments that show that. And the way that you observe it makes a difference because you are looking for this, right? Well, that's obviously a particle. Well, that's obviously a wave. It's both. And the reason that it is both is because it is a particle navigating through the magnetics of the plasma, holding everything in place. So for that light to shine on me, it has to pass around oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, carbon, all of the elements that are free floating around me. It has to pass around them. It can't pass through them. And so that, to me, is going to explain a lot of things, right? When science wraps its head around that it can actually be both, we'll get a lot more progress. Back to the text. Has not Newton himself expressed grave doubts about the nature of force and the corporeality of the agents, as they were then called? So has Cuvier, another scientific light shining in the night of research. He warns his readers, in the Revolution du Globe, about the doubtful nature of the so-called forces, saying that it is not so sure whether those agents were not spiritual powers after all, the agents spirituels. At the outset of his Principia, Sir Isaac Newton took the greatest care to impress upon his school that he did not use the word attraction with regard to the mutual attraction of bodies in physical sense. To him it was, he said, a purely mathematical conception involving no consideration of real and primary physical causes. In one of the passages of his Principia, he tells us plainly that, physically considered, attractions are rather impulses. In section 11, introduction, really? Section 11 is the introduction? He expresses the opinion that there is some subtle spirit by the force and action of which all movements of matter are determined. And in his third letter to Bentley, he says, "It is inconceivable that inanimate brute matter should, without the mediation of something else which is not material, operate upon and affect other matter without mutual contact, as it must do if gravitation, in the sense of Epicurus, be essential and inherent in it. That gravity should be innate, inherent, and essential to matter, so that one body may act upon another at a distance, through a vacuum, without the mediation of anything else, and by and through their action, which may be conveyed from one to another. It is to me so great an absurdity that I believe no man, who has in philosophical matters a competent faculty of thinking, can ever fall into it. Gravity must be caused by an agent acting constantly according to certain laws, but whether this agent be material or immaterial, I have left to the consideration of my readers. It's magnetics. Again, that is my speculation. At this, even Newton's contemporaries got frightened at the apparent return of occult causes into the domain of physics. Leibniz called his principle of attraction an incorporeal and inexplicable power. The supposition of an attractive faculty in a perfect void was characterized by Bernoulli as revolting. The principle of actio in distance finding thus no more favor then than it does now. Euler, on the other hand, thought the action of gravity was due either to a spirit or some subtle medium. And yet Newton knew of, if he did not accept, the ether of the ancients. He regarded the intermediate space between the sidereal bodies as vacuum. Therefore he believed in subtle spirit, and spirits, as we do, guiding the so-called attraction. The above-quoted words of the great man have produced poor results. The absurdity has now become a dogma in the case of pure materialism, which repeats, "No matter without force, no force without matter. Matter and force are inseparable, eternal and indestructible." True. There can be no independent force, since all force is an inherent power, is an inherent and necessary property of matter. False. Consequently, there is no immaterial creative power. Oh, poor Sir Isaac. If, leaving aside all the other eminent men of science who shared in the same opinion as Euler and Leibniz, the occultists claim as their authorities and supporters only Sir Isaac Newton and Cuvier, as above cited, they need fear little from modern science, and may loudly and proudly proclaim their beliefs. But the hesitation and doubts of the two before cited authorities, and of many others too, whom we could name, did not in the least prevent scientific speculation from wool-gathering on the fields of brute matter, just as before. First, it was matter, and an imponderable fluid distinct from it. Then came the imponderable fluid so much criticized by Grove, and ether, which was at first discontinuous and then became continuous, after which came the mechanical forces. These have now settled in life as modes of motion, and the ether has become more mysterious and problematical than ever. More than one man of science objects to such crude materialistic views, but then, since the days of Plato, who repeatedly asked his readers not to confuse incorporeal elements with their principles, transcendental or spiritual elements, from those of the great alchemist, who, like Paracelsus, made a great difference between phenomena and its cause, or the noumenon, and Grove, who, though he sees no reason to divest universally diffused matter of the functions common to all matter, yet uses the term forces, where his critics, who do not attach to the word any idea of a specific action, say force. From those days to this, nothing has proved competent to stem the tide of brutal materialism. Gravitation is the sole cause, the acting God, and matter is its prophet, said the men of science only a few years ago. They have changed their views several times since then, But do the men of science understand the innermost thoughts of Newton, one of the most spiritual-minded and religious men of his day, any better now than they did then? It is certainly to be doubted. Newton is credited with having given the death blow to the elemental vortices of Descartes, the idea of Anaxagoras, resurrected by the by, though the last modern vortical atoms of Sir W. Thomson do not, in truth, differ much from the former. Nevertheless, when his disciple Forbes wrote in the preface to the chief work of his master a sentence declaring that attraction was the cause of the system, Newton was the first to solemnly protest. That which in the mind of the great mathematician assumed the shadowy but firmly rooted image of God as the noumenon of all. Footnote. Attraction, Le Courtier, a materialist, writes, has now become for the public that which it was for Newton himself, a simple word, an idea, panorama des mondes, since its cause is unknown. Herschel virtually says the same when remarking that whenever studying the motion of the heavenly bodies and the phenomena of attraction, he feels penetrated at every moment with the idea of the existence of causes that act for us under a veil, disguising their direct action. But firmly rooted image of God as the noumena of all was called more philosophically by the ancient and modern philosophers and occultists gods, or the creative fashioning powers. The modes of expression may have been different, and the ideas more or less philosophically enunciated by all the sacred and profane antiquity, but the fundamental thought was the same. Footnote 2. If we are taken to task for believing in operating gods and spirits while rejecting a personal God, we answer to the theist and monotheist, admit that your Jehovah is one of the Elohim, and we are ready to recognize him. Make of him, as you do, the infinite, the one and the eternal God, and we will never accept him in this character. Of tribal gods there were many. The one universal deity is a principle, an abstract root idea which has naught to do with the unclean work of finite form. That I vehemently disagree with. I believe that we are here for a purpose, and that purpose is given to us directly from the one universal deity. And so, being here in the finite plane is for a reason. And because it is for a reason, that means that it does indeed have something to do with the one universal deity, not nothing. We do not worship the gods, we only honor them as beings superior to ourselves. And to me, anything that he is talking about here, which is a corporeal god, is going to be false. It is not a god at all. We will not worship them. I probably will not even honor them. In this we obey the Mosaic injunction. I do not, while the Christians disobey their Bible. Missionaries foremost of all. Thou shalt not revile the gods, says one of them, Jehovah, in Exodus. But at the same time in verse 20 it is commanded, He that sacrificeth to any god, save unto the Lord, he shall be utterly destroyed. That is one of the least contradictory statements that they have. Now, in the original text, it is not God, but Elohim, and we challenge contradiction, and Jehovah is one of the Elohim, as proved by his own words in Genesis, when the Lord God said, Behold, the man has become as one of us, etc. Hence, both those who worship and sacrifice to the Elohim, the angels, and to Jehovah, those who revile the gods of their fellow men, are far greater transgressors than the occultists or any theosophist. Meanwhile, many of the latter prefer believing in some one Lord or other, and are quite welcome to do as they like. That's not it. Right here. For Pythagoras, the forces were spiritual entities, gods independent of planets and matter as we see and know them on earth, who are the rulers of the sidereal heaven. Plato represented the planets as moved by an intrinsic rector, one with his dwelling like a boatman in his boat. As for Aristotle, he called those rulers immaterial substances. Footnote. to liken the immateriate species to wooden iron, and laugh at Spiller referring to them as incorporeal matter, does not solve the mystery. Immaterial substances, though, as one who had never been initiated, he rejected the gods as entities. But this did not prevent him from recognizing the fact that the stars and planets were not inanimate masses, but acting and living bodies indeed, as if sidereal spirits were the divine portion of their phenomena. Ta theoretia ponfenerion. If we look for corroboration in more modern and scientific times, we find Tycho Brahe recognizing in the stars a triple force: divine, spiritual, and vital. Kepler putting together the Pythagorean sentence, the sun, guardian of Jupiter, and the verses of David. He placed his throne in the sun, and the Lord is the sun, etc., said that he understood perfectly how the Pythagoreans could believe that all the globes disseminated through space were rational intelligences. Facultates ratiocinative circulating around the sun, in which resides a pure spirit of fire, the source of the general harmony. When an occultist speaks of Fohat, the energizing and guiding intelligence in universal electric or vital fluid, he is laughed at. Withal, as now shown, neither the nature of electricity, nor of life, nor even of light, are to this day understood. That is because they are different manifestations of the exact same thing. Right? We said it before. Light, motion, heat, life, all are an expression of the Holy Spirit. The occult, and the exact same expression of it is plasma in motion. It is activated plasma, right? Whether that is a fire from a lighter, I'm not going to pull it up today, I've done it the last 3 days, or electricity from a lightning strike. It is the same, right? It is a different manifestation of the same principle. It is the visible expression of ionic changes within the elements themselves, whether they are bonding or dissolving. The occultists see in the manifestation of every force in nature the action of the quality, or the special characteristics of its noumenon, which noumenon is a distinct and intelligent individuality on the other side of the manifested mechanical universe. Now the occultist does not deny, on the contrary, he will support the claim that light, heat, and electricity, and so on, are affectations, not properties or qualities of matter. And again, this one's a little bit, right? An affectation is the result of an action, right? And so, yes, but it is a property of the plasma to give off the light when it is activated. And so it is going to be a property and a quality of plasma to emit light during status change. That is going to be a better explanation of that than this. To put it more clearly, matter is the condition, the necessary basis or vehicle, a sine qua non for the manifestation of these forces or agents on this plane. But in order to gain the point, the occultists have to examine the credentials of the law of gravity. First of all, gravitation, the king and ruler of matter under every form. To do so effectually, the hypothesis in its earliest appearance has to be recalled to mind. To begin with, it is Newton who was the first. Is it Newton who was the first to discover it? The Athenaeum of January 26, 1867, has some curious information upon this subject. It says that positive evidence can be adduced that Newton derived all of his knowledge of gravitation and its laws from Bohm, with whom gravitation or attraction is the first property of nature. So he studied someone else's works and then came up with his own independent hypotheses from that. For with him, His Bohm's system shows us the inside of things, while modern physical science is content with looking at the outside. Then again, the science of electricity, which was not yet in existence when he, Bohm, wrote, is there anticipated in his writings, and not only does Bohm describe all the known phenomena of that force, but he even gives us the origin, generation, and birth of electricity itself. I am unfamiliar with Bohm's works. It is entirely possible that he is correct. It is entirely possible that he is not. I am not familiar. Thus, Newton, whose profound mind read easily between the lines and fathomed the spiritual thought of the great seer in its mystic rendering, owes his great discovery to Jacob Bohm, the nursling of the genii, near Manichaeus, who watched over and guided him, of whom the author in the article in question so truly remarks that every new scientific discovery goes to prove his profound and intuitive insight into the most secret workings of nature. And, having discovered gravity, Newton, in order to render possible the action of attraction in space, had, so to speak, to annihilate every physical obstacle capable of impeding its free action, ether among others, though he had more than a presentiment of its existence. Advocating the corpuscular theory, he made an absolute vacuum between the heavenly bodies. Whatever may have been his suspicions and inner convictions about ether, however many friends he may have unbosomed himself to, as in the case of his correspondence with Bentley, his teaching never showed that he had any such belief. If he was persuaded that the power of attraction could not be exerted by matter across a vacuum, footnote, World Life, Professor Winchell, how is it that so late as 1860, French astronomers, like Cortier for instance, combated the disastrous results of the theory of vacuum established by the great man? Footnote 2. Il n'est plus possible aujourd'hui de soutenir comme Newton que les corps célestes se mouvant au milieu de vides espèces. Parmi les conséquences de la théorie du vide stable par ce grand homme, il ne reste plus debout que les mots attraction, et nous verrons les jours où ces derniers mots disparaîtront du vocabulaire scientifique. It would have been great if you would have gave us an interpretation of that. Right? I know a little bit of French, but not nearly enough to keep up with that. Professor Winchell writes, these passages, letter to Bentley, show what were his views respecting the nature of the interplanetary medium of communication. Though declaring that the heavens are void of sensible matter, he elsewhere accepted perhaps some very thin vapors, streams, and effluvia arising from the atmospheres of the earth, planets, and comets, and from such an exceedingly rare ethereal medium as we have elsewhere described. We're going to touch on this. The vacuum of space is a fallacy. There are great portions of space in which we can detect nothing, but that does not mean that there is nothing contained in them. The heavens contain a lot of things. Some of those are gases. If you are unaware, become aware now. If you did not know in the last 10 to 15 years or so, we have been living under a different sun. It has been more pronounced in the last 5 years than it was in the beginning, but there is a reason for it. If you go out and you look at the sun now, it is bright white. It is much harder to look at than when I was a child, and you should not stare at the sun. I am not recommending that at all. But back when I was a kid, the sun was yellow. It was so yellow that we used to draw it yellow in pictures. And now it is not yellow. It is white. The reason for that is the Earth, the sun, and all of the solar system is in a different part of space than we were 5 years ago, much less 10. At that period of time, we were passing through a cloud. In the middle of space, we were moving through a fog, so to speak, and that fog diffused this light to a greater degree than our atmosphere does, right? Our atmosphere diffuses the light, that's why we were able to see things. The fog did a pre-diffusion. We have now moved out of that cloud, and so the earth is indeed being affected more by the sun now than it has ever been in my lifetime. That is a true thing. That is something that is verifiable. You can go and find the science on it. I'm not going to bother to link it, but it is a true thing. If we pass through this gas cloud, then the vacuum is not a possibility. We don't have an understanding of what exactly is going on out there, but it can be a vacuum because a vacuum would not allow a gas cloud to accumulate in open space. It would have, by necessity, been dissipated over a greater area until it reached equilibrium. That is simply how the physics work. If you create a vacuum in a container, anything that is left in the container, and yes, there are things left in the container, are stretched, right? It's probably helium for the most part, stretched beyond the point of natural. That is probably what's going on in space too. Here is how you can conceptualize this. We walk around through the atmosphere, right? My hands can move freely, but there is something surrounding them. It is thick. It is 32 millibars of pressure. If you go up, it is significantly less. Things are more stretched out and it is harder to fill your lungs with the oxygen that is required to breathe. And if you go below sea level, you run into the exact same elements in a different pressure state. It is a function of pressure and temperature that oxygen and hydrogen come together and create water, which is a thicker state. That is a direct relation to temperature and pressure. You can make ice out of this and reduce the temperature and the pressure, and it becomes easier to do so. Or increase the pressure and decrease the temperature. There's an inverse correlation between the two. It's the laws of thermodynamics. I'm not going to try and explain all of them. But the same thing happens when you get above the atmosphere, right? The further down you go, the more it compresses. Well, the farther up you go, the more it stretches. And that stretching means that these oxygen molecules that were like this are now like this. They're the same molecules, but they have stretched just a little bit and put a little bit of space between the molecules. They can no longer get as tight as they were. They are a little bit stretched out. That is probably what we are mistaking as a vacuum. That is a lessening of the pressure, stretching out the things that are contained within there. That is a function of pressure and temperature on magnetics. That is what is going on up there. It's not that there's this giant vacuum and things are going around it. There's a fluid there, just like this. That's a fluid. We differentiate it because of our terminology and relative to ourselves, but it is still a fluid. It acts exactly like a fluid does. It's just less dense. Up there, it is still a fluid. The waters below have been separated from the waters above by the firmament that is our atmosphere. That doesn't mean that it is a glass dish placed above a flat plane. It is the encapsulation by magnetics that holds this particular pressure differential around us. In space, there is less of that pressure, and so things are farther apart. That doesn't mean it's a vacuum. If it was, this gas cloud that we passed through would not have existed. It would have been assimilated into something containing the pressure to attract it. We passed through this cloud. We are on the other side of it now. We have a visible marker that this actually happened, and the science is there. I believe that this will lead to a further understanding of the plasma above as opposed to the plasma below. And one day, we'll probably catch up. Hopefully that brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion. This only shows that even such great men as Newton have not always the courage of their opinions. Dr. T.S. Hunt called attention to some long-neglected passages in Newton's work from which it appears that a belief in such universal intercosmical medium gradually took root in his mind. but such attention was never called to the said passages before November 28, 1881, when Dr. Hunt read his Celestial Chemistry from the time of Newton. Till then the idea was universal, even among the men of science, that Newton had, while advocating the corpuscular theory, preached a void, as Le Courtier says. The passages had been long neglected, no doubt, because they contradicted and clashed with the preconceived pet theories of the day. Till, finally, the undulatory theory imperiously required the presence of an ethereal medium to explain it. This is the whole secret. Anyhow, it is from that theory of Newton's, of a universal void, taught, if not believed in by himself, that dates the immense scorn now shown by modern for ancient physics. The old sages had maintained that nature abhorred vacuum, and the greatest mathematicians of the world, read of the Western races, had discovered the antiquated fallacy and exposed it. And now modern science vindicates, however ungracefully, archaic knowledge, having, moreover, to vindicate Newton's character and powers of observation at this late hour, after having neglected for 1 century and a half to pay any attention to such very important passages, perchance because it was wiser not to attract any notice to them. Better late than never. And now Father Ether is re-welcomed with open arms and wedded to gravitation, linked to it for weal or woe until the day when it, or both, shall be replaced by something else. 300 years ago it was plenum everywheres. Then it became one dismal vacuity. Later still the sidereal ocean beds, dried up by science, rolled onward once more their ethereal waves. Recede ut proceeds must become the motto of exact science, exact chiefly in finding itself inexact every leap year. But we will not quarrel with the great men. They had to go back to the earliest gods of Pythagoras and old Canada for the very backbone and marrow of their correlations and newest discoveries, and this may well afford good hope to the occultist for the minor gods. For we believe in Le Courtier's prophecy about gravitation. We know the day is approaching when an absolute reform will be demanded in the present modes of science by the scientists themselves, as was done by Sir W. Grove, F.R.S. Till that day, there is nothing to be done. For if gravitation were dethroned tomorrow, the day after the scientists would discover some other new mode of mechanical motion. Footnote. When read in a fair and unprejudiced spirit, Sir Isaac Newton's works are an ever-ready witness to show how he must have hesitated between gravitation and attraction, impulse, and some other unknown cause to explain the regular course of the planetary motion. But, see Treatise on Color, we are told by Herschel that Newton left with his successors the duty of drawing all the scientific conclusions from his discovery. How modern science abused the privilege of building its newest theories upon the law of gravitation may be realized when one remembers how profoundly religious was that great man. Rough and uphill is the path of true science, and its days are full of vexation of spirit. But in the face of its 1,000 contradictory hypotheses to explain physical phenomena, there never was yet a better one than that of motion, however paradoxically interpreted by materialism. As may be found on the first pages of Book 1, occultists have nothing, surely, against motion. Footnote 2. The materialistic notion that because in physics or sensible motion is impossible in pure space or vacuum, therefore the eternal motion of and in cosmos, regarded as infinite space, is a fiction, only shows once more that such words as pure space, pure being, the absolute, etc., of Eastern metaphysics have never been understood in the West. Occultists have nothing surely against motion, the great breath of Mr. Heber Spencer's unknown. But, believing that everything on earth is the shadow of something in space, they believe in smaller breaths, which, living, intelligent, and independent of all but the law, blow in every direction during manvanteric periods. These science will reject, but whatever replaces attraction, alias gravitation, the result will be the same. Science will be as far from the solution of its difficulties as it is now, unless it comes to some compromise with occultism and even with alchemy, which supposition will be regarded as an impertinence, but remains a fact nevertheless. As Fay says, il manque quelque chose aux géologies pour faire la géologie de la Lune, c'est d'être d'astronomes. À la vérité, il manque aussi quelque chose aux astronomes pour aborder avec fruit cette étude, c'est d'être géologies. But he might have added with still more pointedness, ce qui manque à tous les deux, c'est l'intuition du mystique. And again, it would have been great to have an interpretation of that. Let us remember Sir William Grove's wise, concluding remarks on the ultimate structure of matter, or the minutiae of molecular actions, which, he thought, man will never know. We know them now. Much harm has already been done by attempting, hypothetically, to dissect matter and to discuss the shapes, sizes, and numbers of atoms and their atmospheres of heat, ether, or electricity. Whether the regarding electricity, light, magnetism, etc., as simply motions of ordinary matter, be or not be admissible, certain it is that all past theories have resolved, and all existing theories do resolve, the action of these forces into motion. Whether it be that, on account of our familiarity with motion, we refer other affections to it, as a language which is most easily construed and most capable of explaining them, or whether it be that it is in reality the only mode which our minds, as contradistinguished from our senses, are able to conceive material agencies. Certain it is, since the period at which the mystic notions of spiritual or preternatural powers were applied to account for physical phenomena, all hypotheses framed to explain them have resolved them into motion. And then the learned gentleman states a purely occult tenet. The term perpetual motion, which I have not infrequently used in these pages, is itself equivocal. If the doctrines here advanced be well founded, all motion is, in one sense, perpetual. In masses, whose motion is stopped by mutual concussion, heat or motion of the particles is generated, and thus the motion continues. So that if we could venture to extend such thoughts to the universe, we should assume the same amount of motion affecting the same amount of matter forever. Footnote. Correlation of physical forces. This is precisely what occultism maintains, and on the same principle that, where force is made to oppose force and produce static equilibrium, the balance of pre-existing equilibrium is affected, and fresh motion is started, equivalent to that which is withdrawn into a state of abeyance. This process finds intervals in the pralaya, but is eternal and ceaseless as the breath, even when the manifested cosmos rests. Thus, supposing attraction or gravitation should be given up in favor of the sun being a huge magnet, which is a theory already accepted by some physicists, a magnet that acts on the planets as attraction is now supposed to do, where to or how much farther would it lead the astronomers from where they are now? The sun being a magnet does not explain people being held on it, right? Because there are points in time when you are on the opposite side of the planet. And if you're on the left side of the planet, right? Here's the planet. You're on this side of it, and the electromagnetic force is pushing you into the planet. Well, when you're on the other side, that electromagnetic force is going to shoot you out. whatever the source of electromagnetism that holds us on the planet, it is going to be located in the planet. It is possible that it is a repulsive force of the plasma itself holding us in, right? So it is a repulsion from space that pushes upon us. That's one of the hypotheses. It is not necessarily the one I hold, although it is close to it. And so when we leave and go into space, we are less affected by that force pushing us into the earth because there is no designated spot for us to be forced into. It is possible that that is true. It is possible that we are held in place by the magnetics of our iron core or some other element that holds our carbon in place, because I do believe that every element is magnetized to something else, right? Iron is to the magnets that we associate with today, but it is entirely possible that there is a magnetic component to silicon or a magnetic component to carbon, and we just don't know what the particular attractive and repulsive force for those would be. And again, that is entirely speculation, so that is something that I believe, that everything is magnetic. How much farther would it lead the astronomers from where they are now? Not an inch farther. Kepler came to his curious hypotheses nearly 300 years ago. He had not discovered the theory of attraction and repulsion in cosmos, for it was known from the days of Empedocles that two opposite forces being called by him hate and love, which comes to the same thing. But Kepler gave a pretty fair description of cosmic magnetism. That such magnetism exists in nature is as certain as that gravitation does not. Not, at any rate, in the way in which it is taught by science, which never took into consideration the different modes in which the dual force, that occultism calls attraction and repulsion, may act within our solar system, the Earth's atmosphere, and beyond in the cosmos. Footnote 2. Transsolar space, writes the great Humboldt, does not hitherto show any phenomenon analogous to our solar system. It is a peculiarity of our system that matter should have condensed within its nebulous rings, the nuclei of which condense into earths and moons. I say again, heretofore, nothing of the kind has ever been observed beyond our planetary system. Well, that was then. This is now. True that since 1860 the nebular theory has sprung up, and being better known, a few identical phenomena were supposed to be observed beyond the solar system. Yet the great man is quite right, and no earths or moons can be found, except in appearance, beyond or of the same order of matter as found in our system. Such is the occult teaching, and that is an incorrect teaching. It's easy to say that, but we can determine by mathematics that these things do exist. We do not, as of yet, have the capacity, even with our advances in magnification, right? We have a brand new telescope, the James Webb telescope, allowing us to see wonderful things that we were never able to see before. But even our closest stellar neighbor, we cannot make out the particulars of the planets. We can, we can see some of them, right? We have seen some planets in other solar orbits, but not necessarily the moons, right? And while we do believe that they do exist, it is almost certainly untrue that there are no moons elsewhere, right? It is almost certainly untrue that there are no planets that operate in the same manner that we do. It is almost certainly untrue. Even though we have not seen it, it is almost certainly untrue. This was proven by Newton himself, for there are many phenomena in our solar system which he confessed his inability to explain by the law of gravitation. Such were the uniformity in the directions of planetary movements, the nearly circular forms of the orbits, and their remarkable conformity to one plane. Circular is definitely stretching things a bit, right? Now, elliptical orbits are different from circular orbits. That is an absolute. But it is close enough that we can go ahead and attribute elliptical and circular and it's not that big of a deal. But retrograde is a thing. And the reason why retrograde is a thing is that we probably do not have the correct understanding of the mechanics of the orbits of the planets. There is another model besides Copernicus, if you were unaware, and it is called the Tychos model, Tychos. You should look it up. It shows, through computer modeling, a better, in my estimation, understanding of how the planets move. Every one of them has its own orbit, and it moves in its own specific way, and they are directly related to cymatics and sacred geometry. That is another absolute fact. According to this particular model, it works out perfectly. Now, science, the big S science, the ones who are in charge of peer review and things of that nature, are vehemently set against the Tychos model being proven true. It almost certainly will be through the scope of time, but it is speculation as of now, simply because it has refused to even been able to be put to the hypotheses in a peer review. So, the forms of the orbits being circular is not real, or even nearly circular. There are definitely some other patterns that are in there. Not even just, elliptical versus circular, right? Some severe problems. And if there is one single exception, then the law of gravitation has no right to be referred to as a universal law. These adjustments, we are told, Newton, in his general scholium, pronounced to be the work of an intelligent and all-powerful being. Intelligent that being may be, as to all-powerful, there would be every reason to doubt the claim. A poor god, he, who would work upon minor details and leave the most important to secondary forces. The poverty of the argument and logic in this case is surpassed only by that of Laplace, who, seeking very correctly to substitute motion for Newton's all-powerful being, and ignorant of the true nature of that eternal motion, saw in it a blind physical law. Might not those arrangements be an effect of the law of motion, he asked, forgetting, as all our modern scientists do, that this law and this motion are a vicious circle, so long as the nature of both remains unexplained. His famous answer to Napoleon, "D'où est devenu une hypothèse inutile," would be correctly stated only by one who adhered to the philosophy of the Vedantins. It becomes a pure fallacy if we exclude the interference of operating, intelligent, powerful, never all-powerful, beings who are called gods. I don't necessarily agree with that, right? This is one of those things that we will not know, right? It is possible that it is purely motion. It is possible that there is a being. I do, however, not call them gods. I believe that there are two planes of existence beyond ours, the sixth, which has a view backwards and forwards in history, and a seventh, which is the plane of interference, which has an understanding of that view backwards and forwards in history. And so, I believe that there are forces, but I don't believe that they are necessarily in charge of making sure that the moon points at the earth, or that the earth revolves around the sun. I don't believe that there is a being doing that. And if that makes me non-spiritual, then whatever, I don't care. Right? I believe in God unequivocally. I believe that God is everything, unequivocally, and that all of the laws of motion are his, that he put them into place, and even if there is no one in particular maintaining that at all points in time, it is still going to be a thing, right? If I throw something over there until inertia takes over, it's going to move over there. But we would ask the critics of the medieval astronomers, why should Kepler be denounced as most unscientific for offering the same solution as Newton did, only showing himself more sincere, more consistent, and even more logical? Where may be the difference between Newton's all-powerful being and Kepler's rectores? his sidereal and cosmic forces, or angels. Kepler is again criticized for his curious hypothesis which made use of the vertical movement within the solar system, for his theories in general, for his favoring Empedocles' idea of attraction and repulsion, and solar magnetism in particular. Yet several men of science, several modern men of science, as will be shown, Hunt, if Metcalfe is to be excluded, Dr. Richardson, etc., favor the idea very seriously. He is half excused, however, on the plea that, to the time of Kepler, no interaction between masses of matter had been distinctly recognized which was generically different from magnetism, world life. Is it distinctly recognized now? Does Professor Winchell claim for science any serious knowledge whatever of the natures of either electricity or magnetism, except that both seem to be the effects of some result arising from an undetermined cause? The ideas of Kepler, weeded from their theological tendencies, are purely occult. He saw that 1. The sun is a great magnet. This is what some eminent modern scientists and also the occultists believe in. The sun is a source of magnetic emanations. It is not necessarily a magnet by itself. Footnote. But see Astronomie de Moyen Age by Delambre. 2. The solar substance is immaterial. That is patently untrue, in the sense, of course, of matter existing in states unknown to science. Okay. Right. It emits radiation. Radiation has weight. Therefore, solar substance is material. Right. Even if we do not have the understanding of what is going on in the sun, I believe that it is a cathode or an anode. It is taking energy from here and transferring it to there. That is entirely possible to be false. I don't hold that it is an empirical truth, but it is my estimation of what is happening based upon science that I have seen, not necessarily conducted myself. If you would like a better explanation of that, the guys over at the Thunderbolts Project will definitely help you out. 3. He provided for the constant motion and restoration of the sun's energy and planetary motion, the perpetual care of a spirit or spirits. The whole of antiquity believed in this idea. The occultists do not use the word spirit, but say creative forces, which they endow with intelligence, but we may call them spirits also. This theory is tabooed a great deal more on account of the spirit that is given room in it than anything else. Herschel, the elder, believed in it likewise, and so do several modern scientists also. Nevertheless, Professor Winchell declares that a hypothesis more fanciful and less in accord with the requirements of physical principles has not been offered in ancient or modern times. I don't know. I think somebody driving a chariot across the sky is pretty fanciful. That would be a hypothesis that was more fanciful and less in accord with the requirements of physical principles, wouldn't you think? Oh, you were just being pedantic. I got you. The same was said, once upon a time, of the universal ether, and now it is not only accepted perforce, but advocated as the only possible theory to explain away certain mysteries. Grove's ideas, when he first enunciated them in London about 1840, were called as unscientific as the above. Nevertheless, his views on the correlation of forces are now universally accepted. It would, very likely, require one more conversant with science than is the writer to combat with any success some of the now prevailing ideas about gravitation and other similar solutions of cosmic mysteries. But let us recall a few objections that came from recognized men of science, from astronomers and physicists of eminence, who rejected the theory of rotation as well as that of gravitation. Thus, one reads in the French Encyclopedia that science agrees in the face of all its representatives that it is impossible to explain the physical origin of the rotary motion of the solar system. Guess what? I've got a theory on that one too. Does that surprise you? I believe that the sun is a cathode, what we just talked about, right? It is an electrode. It is dispensing the energy that it gets from over here through itself out into our solar system. And that our sun, our planet absorbs that and redistributes it through earthquakes and volcanoes and things. Part of that process is that there are physical emanations coming from the sun. X-rays, gamma rays, these are physical emanations. They literally exist. They literally have weight even though they are invisible, right? You can feel the effects of radiation even before the burn appears. You can literally feel the weight. It is something you have to look for. It is something that is measurable, however. This force, right, spits out. We are moving through space, and as we are moving through space, we are rotating around. That rotation is caused by the friction that we are pushing against those neutrons and gamma radiation and X-ray radiation. It causes a small, infinitesimal amount of friction for every single molecule, and the more that we pass through it, the more friction there is driven. And so, to me, that is going to be the reason why everything's moving in the way that it is, right? The fact that the Earth rotates as it's rotating is because it is dragging against those emanations. Once again, that is something that can be wrong. It is a hypothesis that I will never be able to test because I refuse to go get them letters behind my name. But other than that, it works, right? At least in my mind. And maybe one day we'll get a definite answer upon that. But until then, that is what I am going to go with. And I will keep on saying it is speculation. All right. If the question is asked, what causes rotation? We are answered, it is the centrifugal force. And this force, what is it that produces it? The force of rotation is the grave answer. Circular logic. Let's check out this footnote 3. We shall be taken to task for contradiction. It will be said that while we deny God, we admit souls and operative spirits, and quote from Roman Catholic bigoted writers in support of our argument. To this, we reply, we deny the anthropomorphic God of the monotheist, but never the divine principle in nature. We combat Protestants and Roman Catholics on a number of dogmatic theological beliefs of human and sectarian origin. We agree with them in their belief in spirits and intelligent operative powers, though we do not worship angels as the Roman Latinists do. That is where I am at. I believe in a God, but he is not a he. It will be well, perhaps, to examine both these theories as being directly or indirectly connected. And that is going to bring us to the end of Is Gravitation a Law? Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. I don't have a whole lot to add here that I haven't added already. I have several theories about things. Some of those I've been able to relay, and some of them we haven't yet got to, but I try to stay on the leading edge of discoveries. Often, in order to do that, you have to dismiss peer review. In order to get a better understanding of some things, you have to get away from the current understanding. Unfortunately, that is a problem that we have because the peer review system is based upon, well, I made my name for this, and therefore I'm not going to let you print something contradictory to that. That's a problem. We have professors who have spent their entire lives, sometimes 40 or 50 years, devoted to this one singular concept, and they will not let it go. And because they have the authority to be in charge of the peer review system, they refuse to let anything come in that might challenge that. That is true with the Tychos model that we just talked about. It is also true of the earthquake causality of the sun, which is something that you should investigate. Suspicious Observers, which is one of the channels that is linked on the bottom of my page as a resource. They can give you a whole lot of information about that. They have predicted earthquakes based upon the activity of the sun for years now. And it is something that cannot be peer-reviewed because they will not let it happen. There are many instances of this. There are a lot of things that are not allowed to be in science. And that doesn't mean that they aren't true just because science won't admit to them. The planes of existence is speculation upon my part, but I believe that they are true, and it's not something that science would even allow me to begin to experiment upon and be peer-reviewed in. The same is true with telepathy and telekinesis. The same is true with healing yourself, right? They're not going to allow things that are contradictory to their viewpoint to be published. So if you want a greater understanding of things, you have to do your own speculation. You have to go to people who are speculating outside of the bounds of allowed science. You have to go and find sources that are outside. And I'm not talking about people like me who are just like, well, I think this particular thing and I'm going to run with it. I'm talking about people who are actually doing the science despite the fact that they won't get to be peer reviewed, right? The Thunderbolts Project, they're doing amazing science. They won't let them write a paper on it, right? It is the same for several of the references that I give you. When I talk about these things and I point you to these people, they're often not accepted by regular science. That doesn't mean they're true, but it doesn't mean that they're untrue either. It means that it is a source that you need to look at and make your own determination about, because sometimes those explanations that are outside of accepted science are better. They actually work a little bit better than the Tychos being a very good example of that. If you haven't checked out the Tychos model yet, I highly suggest you do. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that I have said. Drop it in the comments, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you would like to see me work through another work in the way that we are doing here, let me know down below. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.